We're going to continue talking about space, but instead of talking about the positive and negative space, we're going to talk about space as depth. So this is specifically when we're talking about two-dimensional artwork, so drawings and paintings. What can an artist do to create a sense of depth on a flat canvas, on a flat sheet of paper? So there are some things that an artist can do. We're going to look at them and we're going to take some notes. So this is a very simple drawing, but I want you to look and I want you to think about what it is that is creating a sense of depth here. It is overlap. These spheres or balls are overlapping each other. So the ones that I can't see all of, that must mean they're farther away. And the one that I can see all of must be closer to me. So artists can use overlap. What's going on here? What is creating a sense of depth? It is size. So our brains typically see big things as being closer and smaller things as being further away. So we have two squares here in pretty much the same spot on the paper, but one is big and one is small. So our brains interpret the big one as close and the small one as further away. So what is going on here and what is giving you a sense of depth? It is placement. So here we have a square that is at the bottom, placed at the bottom of the screen, and one that is placed higher on the screen. Our brains typically think of lower on the page as closer and higher on the page as further away. Now there are exceptions to this. So look at this photograph. This man is up high. So is he far or is he close? This is breaking that rule, but typically when we see things that are low, we think close, and things that are high, we think far away. But there are exceptions to the rule, like this photo, when things are flying or floating. Okay, now this one. There's actually a lot of things going on here, but there's something new. So yes, there is placement, low versus high. Yes, there's a size difference, big versus small, but there's something else that's going on. And that is detail. The more detail we see, our brains interpret that to mean close. So here on the stop sign, we see all the sides. We can read the letters and see the word stop. Over here, that octagon has pretty much just become a circle and we can't read what's on there. So a detail versus lack of detail. When we see detail, our brain thinks close. When there's a lack of detail, our brain thinks further away. What do you think is going on here to give a sense of depth? It is a change in value. Value in art is how light or dark a color is. And as you can see at the bottom, there's a dark hill, and then going up, there's a medium hill. And on the highest one is the lightest shade of gray. I remember in high school, my art teacher asking if you were to go out on a typical day with the sun is shining and look out in the distance, would the trees that are like a mile or two away be lighter or darker? And I remember because I got the question wrong, I said darker, but I was wrong. So if you can challenge yourself and do this yourself. If it's a typical day and you're just looking out in the distance, the mountains, the trees, the houses will be a little bit lighter the further away you go. Now, this is not talking about if it's dark and you've got a flashlight. This is not talking about if you're inside in a room. This is basically just outside in a large space on a typical day. You will get lighter as you go further back. So our brains interpret dark as close and light as further away. So in this simple drawing, what do you think is creating depth? This is linear perspective. So this is when parallel lines, or lines that we know should be parallel and never touch, in this case, the edges of a sidewalk, we know that it should be the same width no matter how long we walk on it. It should be 5 feet across when we start, and it should be 5 feet across when we walk 200 yards. But linear perspective starts to bring those parallel sides together. So our brains know When those lines are further apart, that must mean close. And when those lines start to get closer together, that must mean far away. We're going to spend some more time on linear perspective. So let's write some notes in our sketchbook just so we can remember. Brain research shows us that sometimes just the simple act of writing things down helps us to remember. I'm not going to give you a quiz on this. This is just, can we remember this? So 6 ways to create depth. The first one we talked about is overlap. So if something's partially hidden, it looks farther away. The next one is size. Remember that our brain typically thinks big means close and small means far away. Number 3 is placement, high versus low. Typically, when we place things low, our brain sees that as close. And when we place it up high, our brain interprets that as further away. Our 4th way to create depth was detail, or detail versus lack of detail. When there's lots of detail, our brain sees close. When there's a lack of detail, our brain sees far away. The 5th one is value. The darker it is, our brain interprets that to mean close. And the lighter it is, our brain interprets that to be far away. Like there's a lot of atmosphere and air getting in the way and making it kind of hazy and lighter. And the last one is linear perspective. When lines that we know should never touch start to come in together, when it's wide, our brain thinks, oh, that's close. And when those lines are closer together, our brain thinks far away. So now we're going to see some famous works or some other artwork, and we're just going to talk about what the artist did to achieve a sense of depth. So again, a piece of artwork you've seen a lot. I'm sure you know the name. It is Starry Night, and I'm sure you know the artist. It is Vincent van Gogh. So take a look at all the ways that Vincent van Gogh has created a sense of depth. What of those 6 ways did he use? So he definitely used overlap. We can see the large tree figure is overlapping the mountains and the buildings, so that must mean it's closer to me. In the middle, there's like a church steeple that is overlapping the mountains in the background, so that must mean the church is closer to me than the mountains. So he's using overlap. He's using size. The tree is very large compared to the church, so that must mean the tree's closer to me. He's also using placement. So the tree and the buildings are low and the mountains are a little bit higher up. So that must mean that the tree and the buildings are closer to me and the mountains are a little bit further away. I'm not sure that he's using value here, like we saw. Maybe some details, like we see the windows and the doors of the buildings that are closer to me, and we don't see like individual trees or anything on those mountains in the background. So we have a detail versus lack of detail. So yeah, he did lots of things to create a sense of depth. You might have seen this before. Maybe if you haven't seen this exact one, you've seen one like it. It's because lots of times, you know, very important cultural things get done by different artists with their own take on things. And this is a story from the Bible called The Last Supper. And so because it's important and many people have known about it, they've wanted to do their own version. But this version belongs to Leonardo da Vinci. So take a minute and look at what Leonardo did to create a sense of depth. So there's a lot of the same things. There's overlap. We can't see any of the men's laps. That's because the table is in front. That must mean the table is closer. We don't see all of the back wall because the people are overlapping that back wall. That must mean that the people are closer to us than the wall. There's placement. There are, the table is low, so that must mean close. where the windows and doors are a little bit higher. So that must mean that those windows and doors are further away from us. We do have a change in value. The colors are darker as they're close to us on the people, and they're lighter in the background where we see the sky and maybe the tree lines and mountains out the windows. Those are lighter in value. We also have detail versus lack of detail. If you look at the rectangles on the sides, on the walls, they start being very detailed. You can see the pattern, but as you move towards the center, those same rectangles lose that detail. So we can't see the pattern. That must mean those panels are further away. But one thing that this painting has that Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night did not have is linear perspective. There's lots of that. If you look at the tops of all the rectangles, the tapestries on the wall, we know that they're probably hung at the same height, but it's not a straight line. It angles down, and we know the walls are parallel. So they should never touch, but they start to come together as you move to the center of the painting. That's an example of linear perspective. The same thing with the grid lines on the roof. We know that those are all probably parallel, but they look like they're starting to come together. That is linear perspective. Last piece of artwork is not really a real place at all, but there's still a sense of depth here. So can you take a look and see what the artist did to create a sense of depth? So I have overlap. Those red balls are overlapping the green shapes or the green forms and the blue form. So that must mean that the red balls are closer to me. There's low versus high. I guess the rectangles at the bottom look like they're closer to me than maybe the blue zigzag in the middle. There's lots of stuff going on here, and just because it's not a real place, or there doesn't always have to be a sense of a lot of depth, even if just a few inches or a few feet is still a sense of depth, and this artist achieved that here. So I hope you remember the 6 different ways that artists can create depth in their 2-dimensional artwork, because we're going to practice some of our own.